Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game. So today I got a fun and interesting episode for you guys this evening as we're going to be reviewing the TrimUI Brick. It's basically a software emulation handheld that is in the shape of a Game Boy, and I would say for the asking price this thing is definitely overbuilt with some nice aluminum backing on it and a screen that actually surprised me, giving me a lot better clarity and quality than I was expecting going in. Just so you're aware, this was sent in for review from timexplayer.com, but there are no conditions on the review. I just get to review it to you guys, play around with it, and talk about it because you have been asking more about MiSTer FPGA alternatives, especially in the handheld market. Before you get too far involved though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined to want to support the channel, I got a Patreon link down below as well. But for the $80 asking price, I went into this review assuming that it would just be another emulation handheld, something that I could kind of play around with, would end up probably just sitting in my desk drawer, along with the numerous other handhelds I have reviewed and come in. But I was actually pleasantly surprised by the TrimUI, and we'll get into that in the review. But as far as the unboxing experience is concerned, it is a box that holds a product that I know a lot of you like to know about the packaging. Yeah, I'd give it a 7 out of 10. It does the job. And of course, it comes with an instruction manual inside of the box, which no one is ever going to look at whatsoever. That's just a joke, but honestly, this is a review, so we'll go over the features and just toss those off to the side. And while, again, this is never going to replace a Steam Deck as far as emulation capabilities is concerned, it is much smaller, and now on the go, when I'm just kind of traveling around and want to bring something along with me, the TrimUI definitely seems to be the de facto standard I would want to use moving forward. But let's get rid of the packaging and kind of talk about the unit of itself. More often than not, when I review these handhelds, I kind of just play around with them. I find the build quality to be decently acceptable, but nothing to write home about. I would say that TrimUI did an absolutely outstanding job of actually making this feel like a quality product. The D-pad here is excellent. I'd give it an 8 out of 10. The buttons, while being a little bit small, are responsive. I was playing some Neo Geo games on this outside of the review and for the review, and I was able to pull off all of the moves that I wanted to be able to put into the game, and that's really all I ever care about. I would say it's definitely a better D-pad than the Analogue Pocket, but you don't have to try too hard to beat that one. It's probably my least favorite D-pad around. On the back of the unit here, you have this nice plastic grooving here that gives you a good grip, and the actual top part there is going to be aluminum. You have these buttons as well as a USB-C connector in the middle, which can basically dock into whatever you would want to. So you really do get a fully featured set of buttons here. And the best part is you get some button caps for those shoulder buttons, extras, as well as different shapes, so you can kind of actually configure the device to your overall hand feel. And I know if I don't give you some peel action in this video, people can be complaining about it. So go ahead down in the comments and rank that peel below. I'd probably say it's an 8 out of 10, maybe a 9 out of 10 for the angle. But the first thing I noticed that I will get into later on is just how good this screen actually is. I would say this screen is exceptional. The color rendition, the accuracy, the overall motion clarity. The screen for an $80 handheld totally sold me on this entire thing. Now you'll see here we have a couple different buttons that are going to be in addition, but it's set up basically like a Nintendo configuration, except you have A, B, X, Y here. You have 3 buttons down at the bottom as well as stereo speakers. The speakers are absolutely okay. You're going to want to play this thing with headphones, but honestly, what speakers on a handheld device are actually that great, especially at this price point? But I do like the shoulder button layout and how they have that raised secondary button so that your finger can hit it without hitting the actual primary. And getting these additional keycaps is really nice as well. You have more of a lower profile button like you see on the device in the review, but then you also have these larger, taller keycaps as well. So you can go for the rounded one, you can go for more of the squared off one. This is something I don't think I've ever seen in a handheld before, these replaceable caps. Leave me a comment down below and you tell me if it's something you've seen, because I just haven't. Of course, we have to have volume controls. Every handheld does. They're on the left-hand side of the screen. And then if we go around to the right-hand side of the screen, you're going to find a few more buttons. Of course, being a battery-powered device, you're going to have an on-off button. Then you also have a lock toggle switch where you can do different things with in the settings menu, which is a nice quality of life feature to allow the end user to kind of decide how they want those buttons to work. And of course, around the bottom, we're going to have a few more ports. We're going to have a micro SD card slot where you can put on all those games you dumped from your original cartridges. You have your USB-C power in, and you have a headphone jack as well. So do be aware you have those 2 different USB-C ports. One is just for power, the other is basically just a dock into a hub to do whatever you'd want. And like every device with micro SD, you better have some fingernails to get that thing to pop in there. but turning it on again, the first thing I was just struck by was just how good this screen actually is. You never expect in this day and age to have a bad screen on a handheld device. Some are definitely better than others, but I would say that the TrimUI Brick has probably the best screen I've seen in this price point. It might not rival something like an OLED Steam Deck, or it might not rival something like an Analogue Pocket, but of course this is coming in around $80, and I love the first time I turned it on, it automatically went to the Bomberman collection. That is definitely one of my favorite franchises, and that's how I found it when I turned it on, because I did turn it on first on camera here so you guys could see it. And I would say also the number one thing taking away outside of how good the screen is just how attractive the UI actually is in this one. So many of the handheld devices have a functional UI, but nothing better than that. I love the fact that 1941, the Loopmaster, was the last game played. It must be what they play at the factory before they ship these things. And you have a ton of different emulators built in, and honestly I saw Dreamcast and I thought that's going to be pretty optimistic for the specs within this handheld, but I figured I'd give it a try and see how it did, just to see the overall power at the top end of the spectrum. Obviously this is going to be set up more for stuff like Game Boy Advance, but shockingly Dreamcast actually ran on the TrimUI Brick, and I would say it was probably getting like 85 to 90% of the frames I would expect out of it. Now do be aware I shoot all of the on-camera content at 24 frames per second, not at 60, because I do not like the look of 60p. I know it matches the screen, but it's just not for me. And I would say that this was infinitely playable and infinitely controllable. Of course, you're going to have to use the D-pad because there are no analog controls on the Brick, but you can pair pretty much any Bluetooth controller you want with this thing to be able to actually play something like Dead or Alive on Dreamcast. So this was actually very impressive to me, but it's not really the focus of something like the Brick. But going into something like The Last Blade 2 on the Neo Geo emulation option, this just felt exactly like I'd expect Neo Geo to play. And honestly, with the clarity in the screen here, definitely something that is doing an excellent job. And as you just watch me get hit here because I'm not actually controlling the game, outside of the fact this is at 24 frames per second, the color rendition and what I would expect out of something like The Last Blade 2 is excellent here. I really don't have any notes on the actual Neo Geo emulation. I went through NES, Game Boy, Game Gear, everything like that, all of the systems you would expect something like this to excel at, and the screen did an excellent job on each and every one of them. As I try to play the game from the left hand corner of my camera, again, the screen really is the winner on something like the TrimUI Brick. It is just doing the job exactly like you want it to, nothing more and nothing less. And I would say my favorite thing to play on this device is definitely going to be Game Boy Advance. I love the color accuracy, I love the vibrancy of the screen. Unless you actually have a screen modded Game Boy Advance, this is definitely going to do a much better job. Of course, there is Analogue Pocket on the FPGA side of things that will take original carts, but it's fun to have something like this as well. For the $80 price point, I go into a review like this thinking to myself, there must be some sort of shortcoming for them to be able to actually hit the target price. And honestly, at $80, I'm relatively forgiving of things that wouldn't be perfect, because I think to myself, well, it is a budget option, but if you go into the display brightness here, we're only at 6 of 10. You can turn on or off the LEDs. You can even play around with the temperature of the actual screen itself as far as the color temperature is concerned. This is some of the best settings menu I've ever seen, and honestly, as I play around more with the Brick, I really can't find anything to say that it seemed to cheap out on. It has a ton of different settings. You're going to be able to do stuff like hotspots to play against other players. You're going to be able to pair Bluetooth controllers. It was able to run Dreamcast like 85 to 90% of the speed I would expect, and I didn't even play around with any of the settings, and I just popped into Ape Escape on PlayStation Portable, and outside of one frame hitch, this seemed to be running at full speed as well, which was something I did not expect. Now, I wouldn't pick this thing up thinking it's going to be your PlayStation Portable replacement, because of course you don't actually have analog controls on it. It's way more suited for stuff like Neo Geo, MAME, arcade games like that, Game Boy Advance, Game Boy Color. Anything that's not going to require an analog control is going to work exceptionally well. But honestly, the TrimUI Brick does exactly what it says it does on the box, and I would say that this thing has just been a success, especially at the price point. I have so many different handheld devices in my office that have come in for review and that I just have sitting around, and often more than not I will give them away to friends or family members, just saying, hey, do you want a handheld? I've got too many of these things. But the Brick I'm definitely keeping, and when I don't feel like taking out my Steam Deck when I'm on the train or something like that, this tiny little form factor will do it for me. If you have any questions, leave them down below, but we're done. Bye bye.